So, Adya, can you kind of describe and situate your teaching and your practice? I know you trained in Buddhism earlier in your life, but I don't think you sort of, qualify yourself as explicitly Buddhist. Can you just kind of like situate what it is that you do and describe? I know it's a lot of focus on non-dualist, opening up to a non-dualist view of oneself and life in the universe. But can you just say a little bit more about how to situate it, how to describe it?
Well, that's always a challenging question.
I know.
In the simplest way, I try to boil things down to something as simple as I can possibly make it. And to me, ultimately, spirituality always kind of one's life. It always revolves around oneself, ultimately, right? Even if when we're trying to be altruistic or compassionate or whatever it is, it's for most human beings, it's driven by a certain self-concern. And even when we get into spirituality, so one's meditating, one's chanting, studying scriptures or hearing spiritual teachings, whatever it may be. And the funny thing is that what's often left out in that is the person who's doing it, if that makes sense. So often there's a goal being chased, whether it's enlightenment or God or peace or love or whatever that is. But what's forgotten about is the person, oneself, who's chasing that. And all the intention goes to what's being sought and how to go about getting it. So I kind of reversed the whole process. I guess that's my teaching. I try to get down to what I think is the first concern, the first existential concern, which is, what is this thing called me? What is the person? What is this thing called me that's even on the spiritual search, or wanting union, or whatever the concern, or being compassionate, or whatever it is? Do I actually know what this thing called myself is? That's living and that life's happening to and around and all of that. And so to me, if we don't actually have a real direct experiential, existential realization of what that is, then we're kind of it's almost like driving a car without a license. We're being driven by this thing called me when we don't even actually know what it is. So that's really, I guess, at least certainly initially, it's kind of the core groundwork of my spiritual teaching, is getting people to have some real deep experiential realization of what they really are.
And I assume that investigation and exploration must involve uncovering and doing away with delusions and illusions about what this self is.
Yeah. Exactly, because what comprises this self that we human beings seem to take ourselves as, when we really look at it and we really kind of inquire or meditatively inquire, we start to see that everything that we think has self-nature actually doesn't. So we look at our self-image, what we think about ourselves, how we feel about ourselves, and we start to see it's just thoughts that refer to a self that we can't actually find, or feelings that refer to a self that we can't find, or memories that refer to a self that we can't find. And so it is kind of a peeling away or pulling back the various layers of self-identity.
So I see a significant connection there with anatta, the whole Buddhist non-self, as one of the three characteristics of existence, and it's kind of exploring that in an ongoing way.
Yes, that's ultimately that's what will be uncovered. What's uncovered even isn't sort of a better self or a spiritual self or an enlightened self, but pretty much what anybody's going to find if they take it far enough. That's a big if, but if they take it far enough, they'll find what very similar thing that the Buddha found out and many, many other people have found out. Right. that everything that we think has self-nature actually doesn't. And so Buddha called it anatta, or no self. It just, nothing has self-nature, which means that you and I, and all of us, we're not really this thing called a self or a me. Which is strange because it's almost impossible for the Western mind, or I think any other mind, human mind, to think of themselves in any other terms other than a self. Like, how would you even begin to think of yourself in any other terms other than self? See, the mind just kind of goes, it doesn't even know where to begin.
Right.
That's how oriented we are around that idea. But with deep insight, that all sort of collapses. We see, oh wow, none of this has self-nature in it. That's sort of the classic anatta, no self.
Right. Yeah. There's no there there.
Right. There's no there, which of course is that also ties right in with the core fear of people's existence. The core fear is around survival.
That there's no there.
Right. That if I actually look inside, I'll find that there's nothing there. Which is kind of funny because the only way that the mind can, not only intellectually but emotionally, compartmentalize that is, if I'm not there, then there's nothing there. Funny, isn't it? If I'm not there, then it's like total oblivion, non-existence. Again, the impossibility of the rational mind to consider that what we are is something other than self.
That's difficult. That's very difficult teaching to grok.
It really is.
And so why is it so popular? You have filled our building, and you got like 100 or more people on a waiting list. Like, are people really eager to shed these delusions? What is with that?
Well, that's a good question. I've wondered that myself. I really have. Because I tell people all the time that the real impulse towards enlightenment or from reality, it's a very irrational impulse. Irrational in the sense that there's no good reason for it from an egoic standpoint. It doesn't hold out much promise, right? It doesn't tell the ego you will end up being better or happier or anything.
Right.
And so that's kind of an indication when there's that yearning that's authentic. It to the mind, it's kind of irrational because it transcends simply wanting to feel better. Yes, will one end up feeling much better when they discover there's no separate self? Of course. But that can't be one's motivation. And so it's very ironic, I'd have to say, that we would even be drawn to it in the first place. But in the end, we are whatever we're going to call it, we are the Buddha nature, we are the reality, we are the suchness. That's what we are. And so it's sort of a call from that to itself. On that level, it makes perfect sense. Right? Why that call would be seen as sort of irrational from the ego, and I suppose that's why people respond. It seems like I'm often the teacher of last resort. I mean, people do come to me that are brand new to spirituality because, you don't have to have a long spiritual resume for something to really resonate. But often the people that come to me have had lots of spiritual seeking and paths and been very serious about it. And oftentimes they've kind of found that, they didn't really find what they were looking for. And I guess in some way, I just always have figured from the time I started teaching, just tell it to people straight. You don't have to sugarcoat the truth or reality. You don't have to package it in something really enticing to lure people in. Just tell them the truth. And I've even been surprised by how many people resonate with it. Because some of it's kind of good news on the surface, but some of it's not such good news on the surface.
Right.
But it's interesting.